Hey, happy Friday afternoon, everybody. I'm Tim Golden of half of Team Tim. The rest of us, well, they're not here today, but that's quite all right. So today's conversation, we're going to get into, we've brought some really great people. Obviously, we have Jesse and some other stuff, but continuing on the conversation of shift left, right? Um, what is cybersecurity governance? What does it mean to shift left? Why do we want to shift left, right? As IT service providers, we spend a lot of time on the defense, a lot of time on right of boom, thwarting off all of those bad actors. And this concept of shift left is to move towards, yep, you guessed it, left of boom, getting prepared, putting in the policies, the procedures, the tools, the people, all of those things so that your MSP and subsequently your clients can shift left. So today we've got a great group of individuals. Matt, why don't you give us a quick little intro?
Sure. Firstly, I am a CEO founder of Fort Mesa. But who I brought with us today is really a collection of our partners that represent some of the best of how MSPs should be interacting with advanced cybersecurity concepts and services. So we're gonna start out with Henry Zhang from Sention. Um, and Sention's position in the market is hardening. And it's the type of hardening that all MSPs should be thinking about when they deliver an advanced cybersecurity service. It goes beyond an RMM, although an RMM is a great place to start. We may have Walter Haydock joining us to talk about vulnerability management, and we have Michael Norrie from CyDef, who's, if you wait around long enough, going to show us actually from an attacker's point of view, what does a SOC do? Why do we need to harden? What actually happens when a threat hits? So with that, Henry, why don't you take it away and talk to us about system hardening?
Yeah, appreciate the introduction, Matt. System hardening, that's a broad topic. So I think for me specifically, we're thinking about OS configuration hardening, right? And we're looking at things like doing password policies, antivirus, networking protocols, logon protocols, all those different kind of things. And I can actually here, I've never done this before, so let me try pull up our web portal here, which freezes the entire screen for me. Nice. Can you still hear me, Matt?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, cool. Because that just froze my entire page. Great, lovely. I'm gonna assume you can see my screen here. But I pulled up the catalog here for Sention, where we've got, I think it's just over 425 settings or so that we're managing for Windows 10 domain member system. And like I mentioned, if you look through sort of all these different password policies, whether you're trying to align to the NIST frameworks or CMMC or things like that, you can kind of take a look through this and you'll be able to see that we're managing things. We're talking about things like SMB1 client drivers are on here. I mentioned password policy. We've got stuff like OneDrive, preventing usage and storage of things like that. You're saying it's blurry.
So Henry, let me ask you a couple of questions, right? This is
Sure.
awesome. I love being able to see this, right? So you know me, I'm the policy guy, right? And when I hear you say the word policy, it means something completely different to me in the governance space, right?
Yeah, it does.
So maybe you can identify, how you're using the term policy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a policy in this case, I'm thinking about like a technical control, right? So, this is tiny. So let me zoom this in and see if we can pull this up a little larger. 75%. I think that's a little easier to see.
Looks great.
Yeah, that's much better.
Much better.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about technical policies here, Tim, which I think is a little different from your governance side of the fence. But we're talking about settings, policy.
If I had to put this in tech terms, ones and zeros, you're talking kind of similar group policy, right? So we all know what GPO is, right? So when you're using the term policy, we might be equating that to similar things in Azure AD or Intune or in Sention, those
Exactly.
kind of GPO kind of things.
Yep. So we're thinking about things that'll take actual action on the system, whether it's changing the way your password works, changing the way you log in, changing the way your network connects, whatever it might be.
Gotcha.
And yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I think it's something that's pretty consistent across all different frameworks, right? So we've got a bunch here you can look through on Sention, whether you're looking at MITRE, you're looking at NIST, you're looking at CSF, FFIEC CAT, all those different ones. I think those are all things that we're in agreement. They require a baseline. They require these different technical controls to set up. I think if there's any ones in here that are interesting. We've got some stuff for print spooler, and I know RMMs probably manage a small subsect of this.
Yeah, that's my question as I'm looking at this, right, Henry? So what are the broad categories, or what should MSPs be thinking about as they're building their security program, as they're trying to think about offering a configuration hardening offering, or just using it as part of their qualitative, taking that next step and being qualitative with their risk assessments and their policy and their governance? What are some of the broad categories they should be thinking about when they talk about OS hardening?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think hardening it in and of itself is one category to sort of consider. But then when you look at the actual settings, those cross over into a lot of different sort of broad categories. To me, I think the ones that we generally see the most talking about networking protocols, password policy, and log on and sort of like security management as far as sort of login screens and warnings and things like that go. And then on the other side of the fence, just, antivirus, firewall, all the stuff that you need to sort of get fundamentally right on the operating system to begin with.
So wait, hold on. You just said something really interesting. So like when I log into my computer, I get this message that pops up saying you're logging into a blah 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 blah. Like this warning banner, right? I had to create a file and push that out to every individual. Like that was awful, right? So you're saying now Sention can just do that for me?
That is correct. You're selling my product for me, Tim.
Wow.
That's exactly
I'm not
right.
kidding. Like I used to have to do this stuff, like actually editing a registry file, going to the machine, right-clicking, import it. Like, yeah, that was scary stuff. And like now with a couple of clicks, Sention can just do that for me.
Yep. So all you got to do, we install our agent. We run through a quick setup process for you, look at things that are going on in activity on your system, whether you're using things like personal Microsoft accounts, if you have certain settings set up, features. I think some of those examples are using Windows Subsystem, IIS, various sort of indicators of features on that side of the fence. And then we help run through a setup process where you can go ahead and get all those features and settings set up so that you don't have to go through and push a registry file for every single computer you're trying to manage.
That's awesome, especially like as an MSP, like 20 some odd +% of our clients are Google clients. They don't use AD. GPO doesn't exist, right? And so like a Sention tool for my Google clients, like, oh my gosh, click, and yeah, that's awesome.
Let me ask some questions about the types of policies that we have in place here, or that we should have in place here, or what's, how do you guys think about what policies should be? And, there's like unlimited settings in Windows, right, or a Mac, or Google's got a lot of options. But I think you guys have drawn up your sort of like battle card of settings from CIS baselines, right? Can you show us some examples of like the things we should actually be caring about?
That was my question. I'm interested, like top 3. What are the top 3 things you see when you go into these environments that aren't done that maybe should be done?
That's a good question, actually. So I split that up between 2 different categories. There's top 3 for me on the security side, and then there's the top 3 most annoying settings you're going to run into. And those aren't necessarily the most secure ones, but they're the ones that you're going to get the most help desk tickets about. Top 3 on security, I think SMB1 obviously is sort of like a gimme, right? W digest. Those are all sort of technical controls, and they're not really used today. And if they are, you probably know about them. And so it's not like a huge sort of red alert impact where somebody's like, oh, dude, I'm getting a ton of complaints about SMB1 being down or things like that. But from a security standpoint, I think SMB1, W digest, and probably LLM and R, I think are the 3 that come to mind. But on the annoying side of things, we get a lot of complaints about things like OneDrive. It's one of the settings that CIS recommends is disabling OneDrive. It's somewhere stacked in those 450 settings. If you were to just enable all of them, you'd run into that. And I know a good portion of our clients use that, and that locked them out. We had one client way back in the day who enabled all the settings, didn't realize that meant that they had to know their usernames to log in. And then DOS themselves for a good day because they couldn't log in because they didn't know the usernames. So from a security standpoint, not the highest priority, but definitely the most annoying.
So that brings up another question. So how do you approach that, right? How do you approach taking a good not disrupting the environment, right, but still trying to increase the security? Do you start with monitor mode and see what settings are there, and how's that kind of change management process work, or how should it work in your opinion?
Yeah, so in my opinion, we're looking to find this sort of middle ground, right? Because I think we all agree here that as far as security is concerned, and as important as it is, it's sort of meant to be this tool to help ensure that operations continues to go well, right? Like if, let's be honest, if operations was never affected by something on the security side of things, people probably wouldn't take it as seriously as it is. But our goal is to sort of balance those sort of processes. And so the first thing on our side of the fence is to understand what sort of processes are going to cause operational downtime and cause those sort of issues. So we look at those first, and then from there we take a look at sort of what the MSP or what the user thinks is top priority for them, right? So I think there's this sort of whole range of settings that people generally complain about or generally be interested in. So the idea for us is to amalgamate that information and make it available for everybody that's trying to go through that process. So that, if you're going through it and you've had 10 people go through it before you, we know to tell you, hey, OneDrive might be an issue, or Control-Alt-Delete might be an issue, things like that.
Yeah. You don't want to enable all 450 CIS controls because you're gonna have a bad day.
Well, maybe you do.
maybe you have a bad day.
I've worked a couple government projects. That's all I can say about that. And that they did have to have pretty much all of them enabled. And they were multiple year long.
So Henry, do you guys have baseline 1 and 2 from CIS right now? Do you go that deep?
Baseline 1 and 2. So we do 2 different profiles from it. We're doing the Windows 10 standalone and the demand member ones. And we're working on the server ones as well, which are a bit more of a pain in the ass because there's like 3 per year, and then we're gonna cover like 3 years of servers. So love that. But the baselines will cover IG1, IG2, and they'll go all the way up to IG3 as well. Nice. So they pretty much cover everything under the
your system hardening is so just so I kind of understand this, right? So our audience at large, right? And for Heather, and by the way, thanks Heather for joining us as you do each week, right? So if I understand this, you have a risk management framework, in this case CIS, but those apply to a device type, right? So when I think of Sention, I think of I want to align the business to CIS, and that's going to apply to my Windows 10, 11, whatever devices then are part of the process, are part of the Sention program, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the gap we're trying to bridge here, right? Between sort of the ISMS frameworks and the security and different risk frameworks, and how those actually translate to security policy and security technical controls on the system.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I like that because it's about, that next level of maturity. So you may be doing CIS risk assessments with your clients, and they say, oh yeah, we have all these settings set up, check it off, it's good. Well, you can deploy this and say, well, a little more work to do before we can actually say yes.
Just a little bit, right? Yeah, exactly.
So I think there was a good overview of thinking behind. Clearly, configuration profile management should be like at the core of what an MSP does in terms of standardizing. And they're going to be you're going to have different levels of intervention, right, for your different customers and your different service levels. I think when when it comes to the other types of services that you should be delivering along with hardening the system, it's tracking down those vulnerabilities, looking at your software chain. We missed Walter at the very beginning of the call for an intro over at StackAware, Walter Haydock. Walter, you work in the vulnerability management space. Do you want to give us a quick, the place you're working in and what you're gonna be introducing to us today in terms of vulnerability management theory?
Yeah, so thanks for the intro. StackAware is a quantitative vulnerability risk management platform that lets you take your scanner findings and turn them into dollar values in terms of risk, instead of using CVSS scores or other qualitative ways of evaluating risk. And later today, I'm going to be talking about the exploit prediction scoring system, which is a machine learning model that is freely available and lets you estimate the likelihood of exploitation of every published CVE, which is kind of the main category of known vulnerabilities in your network.
Nice.
Well, Walter, you can jump right in if you're ready.
I'm ready. So I'll pull up a graphic here. All right, can you see my screen?
Nope, you need to share.
Oh, there it goes. Yeah.
Good to go. See EPSS on the top?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not hearing 100% confidence. All right,
great
cool.
stuff. Keep going, my friend.
All right, so exploit prediction scoring system is, as I mentioned, an ML model that is put together by a nonprofit organization called FIRST, which is the form of incident response and security teams. And they were the ones who brought you the CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. And the key thing really to keep in mind here is something that's represented by these two graphics. So if you look at this blue shading on each of these circles here, that represents the total amount of known vulnerabilities that you need to remediate using a given strategy. So on the top, you've got EPSS version 3, which is the most recent one, and you've got CVSS version 3, which is the most recent one on that side of things. And if you look at the blue circle here is much, much smaller than the blue circle here. And what this represents is the amount of vulnerabilities you need to remediate in order to cover the same amount of this red circle. And those are all vulnerabilities known to ever have been exploited. And I'll make a note here that this is much broader than the CISA-KEV list. This includes about 12 times as many findings and data points as the CISA-KEV. So to achieve the same amount of risk reduction in terms of your vulnerability remediation strategy, you need to do 12.5% of the work to get to the same risk reduction if you're using EPSS versus CVSS. So, I mean, this is an incredibly powerful tool that I'm amazed that more people don't know about, especially because it's free. You can download the EPSS score for every single CVE published every day. It's updated. You can download it in a gigantic Excel file, or you can pull it from the API. And StackAware pulls in the EPSS and also estimates some information about your environment to come up with a quantitative risk score in terms of dollars based on the asset value and the likelihood of exploitation. So EPSS, even if you don't use StackAware, you should use EPSS to prioritize your known vulnerabilities, because you will save huge amounts of effort when compared to the CVSS. So I'll pause there if you have any questions.
So Walter, and thanks for joining us. I know you didn't get an opportunity to say hello and welcome and tell everybody who and what you are. So why don't you take 30 seconds, tell us who you are, what you do, how you help us in the MSP community. Then I have some questions for you.
Sure. I think it did get a belated intro, so I feel like I'm all set there for the audience. But happy to take any questions that anyone has on this. It's kind of it blows people's minds a lot when I tell them about this, and a lot of people are skeptical. And I'm a member of the special interest group for EPSS. I don't get any compensation from it. It's just kind of my participation in the community. effort. And it really is it is an order of magnitude better than what most people are using today. And you can really cut down on the effort that you are expending while still mitigating the same amount of risk. And you can also kind of explain the value much more effectively to MSP customers by saying, they're asking, why are you billing me to remediate this finding or to patch the system? You can say, well, there's evidence that this is being exploited in the wild right now, or there's a very high likelihood of exploitation over the next 30 days, as opposed to the CVSS answer where you would say, because it's critical, because it's high, which is frankly an arbitrary statement and doesn't really correlate that well with the exploitation.
So we at Fort Mesa, we brought EPSN. We weren't like bleeding edge adopters. We brought it in, but we brought it in early in terms of vulnerability management vendors. We've had EPSS in for, it was beginning of last year that we brought EPSN, and it's really been a game changer for our partners. In our tool model, we help service providers set an SLA with their customers that they can then bill for, right? Which was really challenging, for MSPs to take like a portion of human and figure out how to slice up that portion of human for give customers like a little sliver of vulnerability management, right? And it was impossible with CVSS to deliver that in a way that small businesses found that they had investment appetite. And since we've introduced EPSS, what we've seen is our partners have been able to monetize that tiny little sliver of vulnerability management that they fit into an SLA for their customers. Hey, I'm going to remediate or I'm going to manage anything over like this EPSS level, right? They can now bill for that, which, that 8x effort improvement that you showed on the pictures earlier is what really makes that possible. So we're thankful to the special interest group and the people that have been making that happen. I'm curious how you see, Walter, how do you work with providers, third-party providers to, bring this into their practice, if you're in the channel, right, you have to monetize everything, right? Security is not really the way that you eliminate risk in your business, although you do need to manage risk, right? It's really, it's how you build your business, right? You're in the business of delivering security. So I'm curious what you see there.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first part you mentioned is being able to much more convincingly explain the risk as part of a package selling vulnerability management, because pretty quickly, even people who aren't especially people who aren't especially knowledgeable about security but who are smart will kind of say, oh, you want me to fix all high end criticals? Well, it looks like most of my findings are high end critical. So you get a lot of skepticism from business people. It's funny because security people are the ones who take this more at face value, where you would expect the opposite. But being able to sell those efficiency gains and tie them to actual risk reduction, moving to that next level of tying it to dollars saved in terms of annual loss expectancy, that's where Stackware comes in, because you can pretty confidently make predictions about which vulnerabilities are going to be exploited, and then also looking at historical events, whether it's ransomware, whether it's some sort of data breach, you can see what the damage to an organization is going to be from an exploited vulnerability. I mean, most ransomware attacks use known vulnerabilities. That's the number one method of infiltration as of the last data that I have. And so I think you can sell the risk mitigation as part of the as part of the offering as well, if you can communicate it in a quantitative way. EPSS alone doesn't do that, but it provides you an important basis for that.
Yeah. So let's break this down into my one-man band MSP, right? So yes, I know, and vulnerability management is important, right? So that value prop back to my customers, right? I also understand EPSS is like the de facto best thing now for dealing with VMP, right? So being able to relate that to my client, right? Having that conversation, right? So first.org, right? They were the organization that invented the whole idea of traffic light protocol. My client understands TLP. They understand red, yellow, green. So being able to then say to them, listen, they also invented EPSS, and EPSS helps us understand the potential of this vulnerability actually happening versus you have 10 million highs. And I give this example to a lot of my clients, right? We have one client that has a Windows XP machine that runs a proprietary piece of software. The machine is physically locked in a room by itself, and there's only 2 humans that have the key. And they have to bring CD in order to process that data. Now, that software will only run on Windows XP. We all know Windows XP is extremely vulnerable, right? We all know that that machine is super vulnerable, right? It would get a CVS score or an EPSS score very high. However, the likelihood of that machine becoming attacked, number one, it's never plugged in. Number two, there's only 2 physical humans that could get into that room with their fingerprint scanner. So when we look at EPSS, it can help us understand, like, yeah, you have a super vulnerable machine, but because of these other factors, it is probably never going to happen. But we have, a Windows Millennium machine plugged into the internet at home, and we're running EPHI on it. That's kind of a problem. And that's where, like, an EPSS program can tell us, you are more likely to have this thing because it's happening in the wild. And those are the things that pose bigger risk. Does that kind of like sum it up a little bit, Walter?
Yeah, I would say you should be looking at risk from a probabilistic stance to begin with, which the EPSS helps you do. One key thing to mention is that it is an all things being equal rating. First doesn't know about your specific environment, but it knows that these types of assets are generally, deeper in the network, or these assets are internet facing. It can kind of intuit those things. But your point is valid, that you definitely need to take into account the context of your specific situation. If you've got an XP machine that's behind lock and key and not connected to the internet, then the likelihood of exploitation of any vulnerabilities in that are pretty low. But if you've got an internet facing one, then you could probably take the EPSS at face value. And if you've got Log4Shell in your network, barring any sort of crazy compensating controls, there's probably a 99% chance that you're going to be exploited in the next 30 days. So that's something you need to patch quickly. Or something that has a much lower probability of exploitation, you can defer it to an annual maintenance or a monthly or annual maintenance cycle, or you can even accept the risk if it's below your threshold. And First recommends, if you want to pursue the same level of risk reduction as a high or critical CVSS strategy, then basically anything that's 8% or higher probability of exploitation, you should remediate, but you can adjust that accordingly. And frankly, I would say you should drop that threshold substantially, because you can save so much effort by having a much more efficient remediation schedule.
Walter, this question's super interesting because insurers have been like depending on these quantitative risk assessments for like 2 decades, right? And they're garbage, right? And now we finally have the machinery, right, to make them real. So this is like this question of like, what is the impact, right? Like, is this affecting how insurers are pricing, you think?
Yeah, so I could say that I know from some of my conversations with insurers that they are beginning to integrate this into their underwriting. It's still in the very early stages, and there are, especially for situations where you're scanning someone else's network, it's quite difficult to map, a given asset to a CVE to its EPSS score. That's kind of a technical challenge. So it is evolving and it's happening, and something that I certainly am pursuing or considering pursuing is using data from StackAware of course, with the knowledge of the the customer that's using it, you could potentially use that in communication with your cyber insurance provider to make them understand what your risk surface is. They may see a certain level of risk based on, maybe they're still using CVSS, and you can say, well, actually, look at the EPSS ratings for these vulnerabilities, and the likelihood of exploitation is much lower. So I still think it's early days for EPSS, which is kind of funny to say in 2023. But I think the potential here is huge. And frankly, I'm just trying to get the word out, because there aren't a lot of people, including security practitioners, that know about it. And there is some FUD about EPSS as well, because security people are somewhat hesitant to change.
Walter, you see this question? It's time for your AI plug. I know you got something cooking here.
Yeah, I mean, EPSS itself is a machine learning model. I didn't build it. I didn't train it, but it is you could put it in the broader category of AI.
You did your asset qualification.
Oh,
AI.
right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So on the Stackware side of things, this is not part of the EPSS. Is what Stackware will do, will take information about your asset, which you can get that from a scanning tool like Nessus or what have you, and Stackware will take that and it will feed that into GPT-4. It'll only feed information like the operating system to kind of minimize any chance of your network specific data from leaking, and then it'll ask GPT-4 to classify your asset, whether it's a server or an endpoint. And I've done quite a bit of research and math to come up with expected loss values for different types of assets based on your organization's revenue, based on number of employees, based on regulatory exposure, based on what industry you're in. And that allows you to come up in an automated manner with a dollar value for every single scanner finding that you have, after you run a vulnerability scanner against your network. So that's that can really save you a lot of time. It's essentially an automated business impact analysis, and you can adjust it, tweak it according to your specific requirements and your specific environment. So that's potential path to using EPSS and Stackware.
Great stuff.
Yeah, one thing I just want to give a piece of pragmatic advice to MSPs before we move on here is, the EPSS can be really transformational for existing vulnerability management programs that are struggling. And so, Tim, you mentioned, how do I use it as a one-man MSP shop? Well, I'm just going to tell you from personal experience, it's extremely helpful on the other side of things, as Walter mentioned, like, we're not fixing. Explain to your customer why you're not fixing certain things, what things you are focusing on. Because when you're working in mid-market and larger MSPs with larger clients, it's typically in a co-managed scenario where they can see all the vulnerability findings, and they're going to come to you and try and beat you up in meetings and say, well, why haven't we fixed these 1,000 criticals? And you can say, well, we're using the EPSS. Here's what it is. And this is why we're focusing here. And it drowns that noise so quickly. I mean, I've really seen it work wonders in certain programs. So just something to be pragmatically use it in your program that way.
Awesome. Always, Jesse. Great job kind of bringing that back in. So coming towards the bottom of the hour, kind of keep going the conversation here. Walter, any last words before we move on to Mike?
So I would say EPSS is transformational, and I am really amazed that more people don't know about it, don't use it, because it's free. That is, it's the best thing that money can't buy on the market. And I've heard rumors that some of the vendors that have proprietary scoring systems that kind of built their own EPSS before EPSS are considering just scrapping those and just using EPSS because it's superior. So, if you have the vendors that kind of created this category deciding that they're just going to use the freely available one, then you might want to do what they're considering doing.
VPR.
Yeah.
Like everything in technology, right? Iteration. And hey, now we're wheeling in the sirens. Michael, how are you? Take a couple of seconds to introduce yourself, and whoever's got the siren, please mute.
Yeah, that's me. So I'll get off.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Thank you guys so much for having me here today. I'll just do a brief introduction, and then I'll go into actually a live PowerShell cyber attack to show you what the importance of defense in depth is. So I'll explain that in a bit. So I'm a senior cyber threat hunter with SciDef. So I'm in charge of the detection and response to malware like insider threat, ransomware, phishing, anything that runs on the system will see it. So that's more on the defensive side. And then also what I will do is with the G7 and with the Canadian government on about an annual basis, we'll work together to train the critical infrastructure engineers of different G7 countries on how to detect and respond to a nation state cyber attack. So I have knowledge of both the defensive as well as offensive side, although I specialize in the defensive. But for this demo, I'll show you the offensive side. So I'll share my whole screen. Hopefully it's not blurry. Please let me know if so.
So while you're bringing that up, like, yes, I wish somebody could build an AI to remove the siren sounds from the background, or maybe they could just add more random ones in, right? So yeah, thanks so much for that comment. It's pretty funny. But hey, getting right back to it, we're gonna do a live like ransomware hack thing on PowerShell. Super fun, right?
Exactly. So is the screen clear? Can you see the text clearly?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what hackers are doing nowadays are they're leveraging trusted or native parts of the operating system in order to run malicious commands. So PowerShell is one of these things. It's a native part of Windows. It's used to run things behind the scenes or to do scripting. But hackers will use this to evade signature-based or reputation-based and even algorithmic-based detection mechanisms. So this is what an attack will typically look like. So we have invoke expression super malware. This just means run super malware. Another way to write this is IEX super malware. So IEX is just the shortcut of invoke expression. So if the super malware file were known to be a bad file, that would get blocked automatically left of boom. So it wouldn't have the chance to even install on the system. And that's really what we hope for. But a lot of the times what hackers are doing is they are testing their malware in offline virtual machines before even deploying it to a target. So they'll take a bunch of automated security controls. They'll put it on this offline virtual machine and test the malware against those solutions in order to see do they work or not. So this is what the Conti ransomware gang would do before they were split between their Ukrainian and Russian sides. So what I'm going to show you is a form of PowerShell obfuscation to show you how these hackers are going to hide the PowerShell commands that they're running, not only from an AV, but also from any kind of automated security solution. So first, we'll take a variable PS home, which is the default location of PowerShell on all Windows devices. And this is important for a very simple reason. We want to run this command in a way that doesn't actually look like this, because the invoke expression or IEX would be potentially what triggers an alert or what makes this command suspicious. So instead, we will request the 21st character from this location. So that's an I. I can request the 30th character as well, which is an E. And then I can combine those two and add an X on the end. So as you can see, we have the first part of our command, IEX. However, this is an attack that was used in the past to bypass automated EDR. So it's a known attack at this point. So if we try to run it, it will get blocked by my antivirus. So the script contains malicious content. But what hackers are doing is, again, they're testing things in an offline machine before even deploying it to a target. So they want to make sure that it works. So let's say that I'm the hacker in this case. I'm going to continue testing. So I want to run my IEX. What I'll do is I'll take the letter I and I will convert it into bytes. So I get 105 bytes. Just move this over to the side so you can see that. And then I can do that same conversion the other way around. So 105 bytes back into a letter. So we get an I. So let's see if that same type of conversion works with the E and the X. And hopefully it will allow me to bypass the automated solutions on my machine. So there we go. We've gotten our IEX command running in memory where it's a lot harder to detect. And what about the super malware component of the command line? So we have the IEX expression over here. And then we've taken the super malware file and broken it up into two different pieces, A and B, super and malware. The reason for this is, again, to bypass reputation-based detection or prevention where you have, sorry if you hear this very loud noise in the background, somebody's blasting music in their car.
Keep going.
All right. So the super malware file has been broken into two different pieces in order to obfuscate it not only from the signature-based detection, but from the analyst that would later receive the alert. So it's very confusing to see all of these obfuscated, encoded commands. So let's see if this is actually able to execute. Yep, it's successful. So the malware has installed on the machine. So now that the hacker has their foothold into the first computer on a network, what happens from here? And what's the purpose of showing you this, this PowerShell bypass? Well, the whole purpose of this is to bring up the concept of defense in depth, or having a layered defense to your company's or your client's security posture. So a layered defense means having a good variety of security controls, tools, and defenses in place. So tools that are inherently different from each other. So tools that involve risk and governance, tools that are left of boom to prevent malware from executing. Typically, left of boom will specialize in known attacks, such as this one. And then even right of boom, which with threat hunters such as myself. So we're specializing in attacks like this, where you have obfuscated commands that are specifically designed to bypass any kind of automation. So it's even more relevant in today's cybersecurity landscape with things like ChatGPT and large language models, because if you look up the Black Mamba research project that was done on the generation of malware using ChatGPT and other AI, hackers are now able to generate polymorphic malware dynamically. So that sounds very confusing. What it really means is they're able to very quickly generate malware that can change its signature, its structure, its architecture every time it runs. So it's a lot more, it's able to more successfully bypass automated solutions with ease. So in having a good diversity of...
I'm going to keep doing this. Let's break this down, right? Because we have to remember who our audience is. This is a very amazing demo, right? And so I think we should just do a full session on this stuff, like this particular piece coming up in a week or two. But
Okay.
let me break this down, right? So what I think I am hearing you say is that with the inventions of the Brads and the Chat GPTs and all those AI, ML, whatever things, they're using these tools to write scripts similar to what you just showed us to bypass sort of standardized security measures that Right of Boom keeps throwing in there, like have an EDR, have an MDR, have an XDR, have a blah, 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 have all this stuff. But now with the invention of the Chat GPTs and the Brads and the Bings, using those tools to generate strings like you just showed us that can be passed, can be obfuscated. Did I say that word right?
Yeah, obfuscated. Yeah.
Obfuscated, like, my mouth doesn't work. But being able to like use something as free as ChatGPT, generate a thing like you just did, and bypass everything that we just went on Right of Boom and we put in to play defense.
Yeah. The thing is, the same thing has been happening for, I would say, even decades with polymorphic malware. So malware that is changing its structure every time it runs. But what's really different about the introduction of AI is that it's allowing hackers to more swiftly generate these types of attacks so that they can do their testing in the offline machines. They can see which one works and which one doesn't, and then they can deploy those ones. So polymorphism, the encoding, obfuscating.
Polymorphism. Wait, polygon's my thing.
They're big words.
They are big words, right? So poly, a shape, right? So in this particular instance for our audience, what polymorphic, like break that down in its simplest terms, not to be confused with polygon.
Yeah, so polymorphic, when we're talking about a cybersecurity context, is malware that will, so the code of the malware will be slightly changed every time it runs. So you can do plenty of things like basically you run the same command every time. So functionally, what's happening in the background is the same, but on a surface level, the structure changes. So when you're changing the structure using things like encoding, compression, and other things like that, you're able to adjust the surface level presentation of a malware so that when it's presented with the security solutions that are automated, it's more successfully able to bypass them because of that changing fluid structure that is quite easily nowadays able to bypass simple automated controls. So there is AI on the defensive side, which is good at picking it up. But like the human body, I always say that you can exercise, you can sleep, eat healthy, but prevention is only one part of the whole ball game. So again, it's defense in depth that you want to be thinking about. So having governance, left of boom, even right of boom, all of these things together are what you want to have in mind in order to achieve the best security outcomes.
So,
Yeah, I think
so
I was going to say polymorphics. Tim, you said shape, morph to change. So it's shape shifting malware, and that's the way to think about it.
it's important to note that Mike's not just an experienced attacker / defender. He comes from one of our partners, and they provide a unique value prop that I think is important for our MSP partners. But just to put this in context, on the call today, we had 3 opportunities to stop an attack. And all of these things are things that should be bundled into an advanced security service. And I know, Tim over at Compliance Risk and of course here at Fort Mesa, we're telling clients, you need to have a comprehensive governance, a comprehensive set of controls to deliver security to your customers. And Jesse, you've been on the practice side. How do you operationalize this, right?
Yeah.
But it's the hardening, right? Disable PowerShell, and we talked about the configuration management earlier, right? But if you can't do that or it didn't work, right? It's the vulnerability management, and with EPSS, you can actually eliminate these vulnerabilities that are allowing these attackers to get these footprints on systems. And yes, phishing simulation, right? But you can actually close up the vulnerabilities, right? So that when the user does click the stupid thing, nothing happens, right? And then when that doesn't work, and Mike, you guys are actually detecting this stuff at SciDef, right? You're using humans, not automation, right? Because the attackers are actually testing the automation, right?
Exactly.
And that's why we partnered with SciDef, right? We wanted humans looking at this stuff because we know that the attackers are already testing it, right? And they can automatically test it these days, right? So if your MDR product's automated, they've already gotten over that hurdle, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question.
I was just going to go ahead, Henry. Yep.
I had a little bit of experience working in a SOC at Cisco back in the day. And I think talking about the automation side of things, do you think it's sort of searching for a balance there between the automated side of even something like a SOC versus getting the human element into it? Because I think for me personally, right, I did a lot of tier 1 analyst work. And to be honest, I wish my job was automated. Like I wish I was not a human sitting there looking at that stuff. But to Matt's point, right, like eventually you need to get human eyes on it. Do you think there's a balance that you can strike there where you don't have to have somebody looking at 30,000 logs to make sure that you're not missing this every day?
So it really, really depends. it's always we always think of it as an arms race between attackers and defenders. So you can rely more on AI if that's within your risk tolerance, but there's always the idea that the more you rely on automated systems, the more you have a chance of missing something, like a context that could be missed, that can be caught by human eyes, but not necessarily by a machine. So one example that I always show in my demos is a Trojanized timesheet file. So timesheet.exe, an executable. Normally you would think of a timesheet as an Excel file, but when it comes in as an executable, that type of context was missed by preventative or automated solutions. So having a human investigate those things, it really it changes everything. And maybe I'm biased because I'm a threat hunter and we really do focus exclusively right of boom. So just to clarify, threat hunting is the iterative review of historical commands that have already run, that have already been reviewed through the preventative software. So I'm only looking for the presence of hackers that have been able to bypass the automated controls. So what I often see are those obfuscated commands, the polymorphic commands that to an automated system, they look benign or neutral, but to me, the very mechanism that makes them evasive to an automated system is what makes them very clear to me, because all of the commands are broken up into a million pieces. There's 50 different pieces of encoding and splitting up the command in string concatenation. So all of this stands out very clearly to an analyst. So I would say we're as great as full AI sounds in marketing. We need a good balance of both. So unfortunately, or fortunately for me, my job is still safe.
Well, tier 1 analysts are there to stay, huh?
Totally.
Yes.
Jesse.
Well, I just want to say that I was very happy to hear someone else use the word concatenate, because my wife always rips on me when I use it. She says nobody knows what that means. So I know
Come
one
on.
person does.
Anybody that writes code knows what concatenate means.
But no, so I think, again, we're having some really high level conversations, and I think that's great because MSPs are watching this. There's a technical audience, but how do you convert this when you're talking to your clients, and how do you explain the defense in depth? And all these things can be explained in one of two ways, right? Compare it to an airport or a casino, depending on your audience. So AV and automated tools are like scanning your ID to get in, right? If you're in a database, it's going to tell you, yes, good or bad. But what if you're not in the database and you get in? Then how do they know if you're cheating? How do they know if you're a threat, right? There's air marshals on the planes. There's the eye in the sky with people watching the card tables in the control room. And that's where you can compare that into the human element. And so it's a good exercise to go through, and you can actually take different controls and compare them to each one of those and make it really an analogous, easy to have discussion with your clients. So,
and I would bring that back to my favorite human, which is Shrek, and say, it's layers like onions, my friend.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So that's how I would describe it. Yeah. Michael, any last sort of quick words before we start to wrap up, getting here to the top of the hour?
Just reiterating the idea of defense in depth. It's really the most important point that I like to share with clients. Don't just put all of your eggs into one basket and assume that doing full prevention is going to protect you. Really think of it in a holistic manner, and that will help you to achieve your best cybersecurity posture.
So I was never really good at that, like high school egg drop thing, and all my eggs in one bat. Yeah, they all broke. So, but if I had defense in depth, if I had bubble wrap inside a balloon, inside a thing, if I had my onions, my defense in depth, maybe when I did the egg drop, it would have survived. So bringing us full circle, right? We started out with Henry. We started out with hardening your system, putting in some baseline configuration, right? Determining what you're locking down based on standards, all kinds of fun stuff that Henry and Sention is doing over there in the system hardening, right? Coming around to Walter, right? Talking about vulnerability management, talking about EPSS and the importance of understanding, is this vulnerability really something that I need to worry about? Like Tim's XP machine locked in a building with only one human access? No. But is it exploited in the wild? Probably I should. EPSS can help us with that. all the way through to Michael, showing us a demo of just how easy it can be to exploit something on the command line when you don't have these other things in place, when you are not hardening your system, when you're not looking at the vulnerabilities and appropriately patching, just how easy it can be to exploit those things, right? And so, Jesse, Matt, all of you, thank you so much. It's, as always, it's been a great. And Matt, what are we having next week?
I'm excited about next week. We've got Chris Johnson from CompTIA coming to talk about the Trustmark, which is exciting, and I won't pop too many bottles, but clearly the regulators are coming to get us in the MSP community. So we're going to be looking for ways to prove that we're safe, right? That our clients are safe with us, and you'll have to ask the questions, Tim. It's back to Team Tim next week.
I too am looking forward to having yet another conversation about Trustmark. I think it's so important. I think this will be my probably third or fourth conversation with CompTIA and the Trustmark program. I mean, let's face it, we know compliance is here. And when we look at other industries beyond the MSPs, all of them are regulated, or a good vast majority of them are regulated. And when we look at our MSP community, it's the Wild West. And, bringing this Trustmark and this new version of the Trustmark program forward is really going to help us make sure we have our house in order, right? Mm-hmm. We're protecting all this sensitive data. We're responsible. But who says we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? So really looking forward to having Chris on here next week. Say different bat time, same bat channel, right? So it's at 3:00 next week.
Yeah, next week's at 3. We're still honing in here.
Yeah. All right. So same bat channel, new bat time. Do the like, subscribe, share, comment, tell your all the things we're supposed to say. And hey, you got 2 minutes back. Thank you, everybody. And this concludes your Team Tim broadcast day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it, guys.